evening, I'm Alma Angeles and you're watching Eagle News International. On today's program. North Korea claimed today it had tested another underwater nuclear attack drone, its latest response to joint US-South Korea military drills. Also today, Israeli police are investigating a terror attack in Tel Aviv. After a car rammed into a crowded people, at least one person was killed, 6 more wounded. In the latest, in a wave of escalating violence there. And China launched military drills around Taiwan today in what it called a stern warning to the self-ruled island's government following a meeting between its president and the U.S. House Speaker. And a huge black hole is tearing through space, leaving behind a 200,000 light-year-long trail of newborn stars. North Korea claimed today it had tested another underwater nuclear attack drone, its latest response to joint U.S.-South Korea military drills, though analysts have questioned whether Pyongyang has such a weapon. Now, KCNA said that the test warhead accurately detonated underwater. The test perfectly proved the reliability of the underwater strategic weapon system and its fatal attack ability. On March 23, North Korea claimed it tested an underwater nuclear attack drone able to unleash a radioactive tsunami as it blamed U.S.-South Korea exercises for a deteriorating regional security situation. South Korea and the U.S. on Wednesday staged joint air drills involving at least one U.S. nuclear-capable B-52H strategic bomber. North Korea views such exercises as rehearsals for invasion and has responded to other recent drills with a spate of increasingly provocative banned weapons tests. Also today, Israeli police are investigating a terror attack in Tel Aviv after a car rammed into a crowded people. At least one person was killed, 6 more wounded in this latest wave of escalating violence. Take a look.
באירוע מאוד קשה בטיילת תל אביב, אירוע שהתרחש לפני כשעה פלוס מינוס, אירוע שבמסגרתו רכב עלה על המסלול של רוכבי האופניים ופגע בנסיעה ממש פרועה במספר אזרחים שהיו על מסלול האופניים.
Mr. Netanyahu ordered the mobilization of police and army reserves following the attack. This is the second deadly attack after 2 sisters were shot by Palestinian gunmen in the occupied West Bank. And fears of more violence was already at its peak after an Israeli fighter jet pounded Gaza in a series of strikes. The attacks came hours after Israel bombarded Lebanon following rocket fire from there that the army blamed on Palestinian militants, sparking fears of more military conflict. Israeli military said they were in retaliation for the 34 rockets fired towards northern part of Israel. And violence has soared since Wednesday when Israeli police clashed with Palestinians inside the Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque, just as believers in the world's 3 major monotheistic religions were celebrating their major holidays. On Friday, Hezbollah Deputy Chief Naim Qassem said the threats and intimidation of the Zionist leaders will lead nowhere. Army spokesman Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hecht had blamed Palestinian militants for the rocket fire from Lebanon. The UN interim force in Lebanon, which patrols the area along the border, urged restraint, adding both sides have said they do not want a war. UN Chief Antonio Guterres has urged all actors to exercise maximum restraint. Meanwhile, here are some reactions. Take a look.
I can tell you that the Secretary General is shocked and appalled by the images he saw this morning of the violence and beating by Israeli security forces inside the Al-Qibli Mosque in Jerusalem. At a time of the calendar which is holy to Jews, Christians, and Muslims, this should be a time for peace and not violence. places of worship should only be used for peaceful religious observances. And you may have seen that we also had a statement from Tor Venislan, the special coordinator for the Middle East peace process, which was issued earlier this morning. He said he too is appalled by the images of violence inside the Al-Qibli mosque and disturbed by the apparent beating of Palestinians by Israeli security forces and the large number of arrests. Mr. Venisland also strongly rejects the stockpiling use of fireworks and rocks by Palestinians inside the mosque.
We are having this press conference to express our outrage and condemnation of the attack by the Israeli forces and the settlers against Al-Haram al-Sharif, Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. And it is the right of the Palestinian Muslim worshippers to exercise their religious duties and prayers in this holy month of Ramadan and in any other time in this holy Aqsa Mosque. And the Israeli occupying authorities has no right whatsoever to tell people when to pray and when not to pray.
We are concerned by the scenes out of Jerusalem, and it is our viewpoint that it is absolutely vital that the sanctity of holy sites be preserved. We emphasize the importance of upholding the historic status quo at the holy sites in Jerusalem, and any unilateral action that jeopardizes the status quo to us is unacceptable, and we call for restraint, coordination, and calm during the holiday season. We condemn the launch of rockets from Lebanon and Gaza at Israel. Our commitment to Israel's security is ironclad, and we recognize Israel's legitimate right to defend itself against all forms of aggression.
Well, tonight, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu mobilized the army and the army reserves across West Bank and Israel as this volatile situation only gets worse. In today's other news, China announced it was launching 3 days of military drills in the Taiwan Strait. Take a look. The People's Liberation Army's Eastern Theater Command said United Sharp Sword would run April 8 to 10 for combat preparedness. In a PLA statement, Eastern Theater spokesman Senior Colonel Shi Yi said the United Sharp Sword would involve police patrol drills in the Taiwan Strait to the north and the south of Taiwan, and in the sea and airspace to the east of Taiwan. Saturday's move by China follows a meeting in California between Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen and U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. China views self-ruled Taiwan as part of its territory and has vowed to one day seize it by force if necessary. Last August, China deployed warships, missiles, and fighter jets around Taiwan in its largest show of force in years, following a trip to the island by McCarthy's predecessor, Nancy Pelosi. Meanwhile, President Tsai Ing-wen returned to Taiwan after visiting the island's dwindling band of official diplomatic allies in Latin America, with 2 U.S. stopovers that included meetings with McCarthy and other lawmakers. Let's listen in.
我们过境美国的时候呢，多位美国跨党派参众议员也以实际的行动表达对台湾的支持。台湾守护民主自由的决心得到民主伙伴的支持，也让我们和民主伙伴的情谊更加的坚定。我要跟所有的海内外国人同胞说声谢谢，感谢大家的团结合作。我们让国际社会看到，在面临压力与威胁的时候，台湾会更团结，绝对不会因为受到打压而屈服，更不会因为受到阻碍而停止跟世界交流。
Now, hours before meeting with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy in California on Wednesday, China sent its Shandong aircraft carrier through Taiwan's southeastern waters on its way to the western Pacific. Taiwanese Defense Ministry says the PLA Shandong and the USS Nimitz were seen near the island amid fury from Beijing over the meeting. China's second aircraft carrier was on the way to its first ever maneuvers in the western Pacific. China also blacklisted the Hudson Institute and Ronald Reagan Library, saying the two U.S. institutions had provided platforms and facilities for Taiwan independence activities by President Tsai. Now, earlier, U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who is second in line to the U.S. presidency, has vowed that U.S. arms sales to Taiwan, which have infuriated the Chinese leadership, would continue in what he said was a proven strategy to dissuade aggression. Let's listen in.
Based on our conversations, it's clear that there are several actions are necessary. First, we must continue the arms sales to Taiwan and make sure such sales reach Taiwan on a very timely basis. Second, we must strengthen our economic cooperation, particularly with trade and technology. Third, we must continue to promote our shared values on the world stage. Tension in the world are at this highest point since the end of the Cold War. Well, my first message to China, there's no need for retaliation. But the one thing I would say to China, too, at no time, I am the Speaker of the House. There's no place that China is going to tell me and where I can go or who I can speak to, whether you be foe or whether you be friend. I'm not the general manager of the Houston Rockets. And the one thing I hope all countries see is that we're united in this same approach, together, on both sides. And we're going to speak with one voice when it comes to China or any others when we look at foreign policy. One of my goals as Speaker is to take away the things that become so partisan. Not everything has to be partisan. I respect people on the other side of the aisle that have a different philosophical belief, but when it comes to peace, freedom, and democracy, I think that unites us.
Beijing has already sent out repeated warnings even before the meeting took place and issued a rebuke on after the meeting between House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and the Taiwanese president had concluded. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning said the issue of Taiwan is not about democracy, but related to China's sovereignty. Without naming any country, but obviously referring to the U.S. and its Western allies, Ms. Mao said some nations were using Taiwan to control China. Take a look.
台湾问题不是什么民主问题，而是事关中国主权和领土完整的问题。台湾是中国领土不可分割的一部分，中国的主权和领土完整从未分割，也绝不允许分割。一些国家炒作民主对抗威权的虚假叙事，以民主之名纵容支持台独分裂势力，搞以台制华，这种做法十分危险，也不可能得逞。
Now, President Tsai, who was first elected president in 2016, is not to be held back. She argues Taiwan's future can only be decided by its people. China hasn't ruled out the use of force to take control of the island. Meanwhile, there's growing fallout in Tennessee after its historic vote. The expulsion from office of two Tennessee Democratic state rep over their gun control protests at the state capitol in the wake of a school shooting. Let's listen in.
25 days. Having received the concurrence of 2/3 of the members to which the House is entitled under Constitution, I hereby declare Representative Justin Jones of the 57 Representative District expelled from the House of Representatives of the 113th Assembly of the State of Tennessee.
I don't know about what's going to happen with the reappointment, but I do hope to get reappointed to serve in the state legislature by the Shelby County Commissioners. And a lot of them I know are upset about the anti-democratic behavior of this white supremacist-led state legislature.
That was their only ask of us, is to respond to their grief, to respond to a traumatized community. But in response to that, the first action of this body is to expel members for calling for common sense gun legislation. We were calling for a ban of assault weapons, and the response of this body is to assault democracy. This is a historic day for Tennessee, but it may mark a very dark day for Tennessee because it will signal to the nation that there is no democracy in this state. It will signal to the nation that if it can happen here in Tennessee, it's coming to your state next. And that is why the nation is watching us, what we do here.
I hereby declare Representative Justin J.
Now, this has sparked outrage on the left and the left Tennessee House Republicans, defending against accusations of unequal treatment and racial motivations. Lawmakers voted along mostly party lines to expel Justin Jones and Justin Pearson. A vote to expel the third member of the group, Gloria Johnson, failed. Expulsion requires a two-thirds majority of the 99-member House. The trio was accused of breaking House rules and disorderly behavior. Pearson and Jones had first walked up to the House podium during the floor session and used a bullhorn to lead gun reform chants and were later joined by Johnson. After protesting for stricter gun laws, days after a Nashville school shooting left 6 people dead. The 28-year-old shooter fired 152 rounds from 3 firearms at the Nashville private school during this rampage. Meanwhile, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris said the 2 black legislators who were expelled from the Republican-led Tennessee State Assembly chose to lead and show courage during a speech in Nashville. Let's listen in.
Leaders, it was about who they were representing. It's about whose voices they were channeling. Understand that. And is that not what a democracy allows? A democracy says you don't silence the people. You do not stifle the people. You don't turn off their microphones when they are speaking about the importance of life and liberty. In order to make sure the voices were represented in that place where elected leaders are supposed to lead in a democracy, these leaders had to get a bullhorn. To get a bullhorn to be heard. Well, you know what? That happens in a democracy too.
And tonight's other news, the New York Times reporting that secret documents that provide details of U.S. and NATO plans to help prepare Ukraine for a spring offensive against Russia have spilled onto social media platforms, and the DOJ is investigating. We are aware of the reports of social media posts, and the department is reviewing the matter, that according to Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh. The Pentagon said it is addressing the reported security breach. The documents were spread on Twitter and Telegram and reportedly contained charts and details about weapons deliveries, battalion strengths, and other sensitive information. One of the documents summarized the training schedules of 12 Ukraine combat brigades and said 9 of them were being trained by U.S. and NATO forces and needed 250 tanks and more than 350 mechanized vehicles. Information in the documents is at least 5 weeks old, with the most recent dated March 1. Now, both sides suggest the leak of Western war plans could be a ploy, and some experts said it may hurt the latest Ukrainian offensive. And Moscow has formally charged U.S. journalist Evan Gershkovich with espionage, according to Russian news agencies today. Accusations rejected by both the reporter and his employer. U.S. President Joe Biden has called for Gershkovich's release, and White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre earlier described the allegation of espionage as ridiculous. First, let's listen in.
These charges are ridiculous. Evan is not a spy. Evan has never been a spy. Evan has never worked for the U.S. government, and he is an independent journalist employed by the Wall Street Journal, as you all know. This is a case that is a priority for this president. A couple of things that occurred over the weekend that I'll just lay out for you here. Secretary Blinken spoke directly with Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov to convey that the United States is gravely concerned that Evan's detention is unacceptable and that he should be immediately released.
Investigators from the FSB, the state security service that succeeded the KGB, charged Gershkovich with espionage in the interest of his country, according to state-run agency TASS, citing a law enforcement source. The charges against Wall Street Journal correspondent Evan are the first of their kind in Russia since the fall of the Soviet Union, prompting an outcry from media outlets, rights groups, and foreign governments. His arrest comes as Moscow's relationship with Washington has seriously deteriorated because of the Ukraine offensive. Washington has long accused Moscow of arbitrarily arresting Americans in order to secure the release of detained Russians. Now, the arrest led the State Department to summon the Russian ambassador and Secretary of State Antony Blinken pressed the case in a telephone call to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, only their third one-on-one interaction since the Ukraine offensive began in February last year. Let's listen in.
In my own mind, there's no doubt that he's being wrongfully detained by Russia, which is exactly what I said to Foreign Minister Lavrov when I spoke to him over the weekend, and insisted that Evan be released immediately. But I want to make sure that, as always, because there is a formal process, that we go through it, and we will, and I expect that to be completed soon.
Вот деятельность его, в частности, то, что было в Екатеринбурге, заявленному статусу журналиста, она не соответствовала. Это была деятельность, которую назвать журналистикой нельзя. Это не журналистика. Соответственно, в отношении этих его деяний, поступков и были заявлены претензии нашей Федеральной службы безопасности.
Russian officials insist Gershkovich was caught red-handed when he was detained in Yekaterinburg, some 1,800 kilometers east of Moscow. Gershkovich worked for AFP in Russia before taking a job with the Journal. Gershkovich's detention comes as Western journalists in Russia face increasing restrictions. Staff of Western media outlets often report being tailed, particularly during trips outside of the major urban hubs of Moscow and St. Petersburg. Many Russians are reluctant to speak to foreign media due to strict censorship laws adopted in the wake of the Ukraine offensive. Meanwhile, French President Macron finished his China visit with little progress seen on the Ukraine war. President Macron said he was counting on his Chinese counterpart, President Xi Jinping, to bring Russia to its senses over its war in Ukraine. The two sides also reaffirmed their opposition to the use of nuclear weapons during this conflict.
关于乌克兰危机，中方坚持劝和促谈、政治解决。中方愿同法方一道，呼吁国际社会保持理性克制，避免采取使危机进一步恶化甚至失控的行动，严格遵守国际人道法，避免袭击平民和民用设施。
La deuxième chose, vous venez de rappeler avec beaucoup de force le sérieux, l'esprit de responsabilité qu'imposent les questions nucléaires et la volonté que la France partage qu'évidemment le nucléaire soit exclu totalement de ce conflit, qu'il y ait le respect de l'ensemble des traités internationaux en la matière et qu'en aucun cas il ne puisse y avoir de déploiement d'armes nucléaires en dehors du territoire des États dotés, en particulier en Europe. Et à cet égard...
Show of anger against President Emmanuel Macron's pension reforms. President Macron, currently visiting China, is facing the biggest challenge of his second term over the changes, defiantly refusing to budge despite sliding personal popularity ratings. The Interior Ministry said 570,000 people had demonstrated, sharply down from the 740,000 it counted last week. Official figures remain well below organizers' counts, with the CGT union claiming 400,000 people had turned up to the Paris protests, while the ministry tallied 93,000. All sides in the standoff are awaiting an April 14 verdict on the validity of the reform by France's Constitutional Council, which has the power to strike out some or even all of the legislation. The controversial reforms seek to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64 while requiring people to work longer for a full payout. In other news, World Health Organization is warning that climate change, deforestation, and urbanization are causing an uptick in outbreaks of diseases spread by mosquitoes like dengue, Zika, and chikungunya. Viruses causing these diseases, known as arboviruses, have long been public health threats in tropical and subtropical areas, but now global warming is driving the spread of mosquitoes into new regions, further south in the Americas and with the potential to threaten Europe.
Right now, around 129 countries are at risk of dengue, and it is endemic in over 100 countries. The reason also is that it is a very unique virus which has got 4 closely related serotypes, we call them, which is dengue 1 to dengue 4. Most people who get dengue first time, it's a very mild disease, probably with a simple fever and body ache, but there are occasions where you get a dengue a second time with another serotype, and that is when you end up with a severe case of dengue, which could lead to organ failure and death. The uniqueness of the Aedes mosquito is also that there are 2 unique features of this mosquito, which is unlike other mosquitoes. One, this mosquito's egg can remain dry for several months. And so it has a potential in a tree hole or in any container, there may be a small dry egg, which will hatch when it comes in contact with water within a few hours. It can hatch and the mosquito will emerge. So this dry egg is a big problem, big challenge, and we really can't trace them. The second challenge we have is this mosquito also has a habit of biting several people in one go. So usually the malaria mosquito, for example, it sits on a person, it takes a full whatever blood it needs, and then it goes for development of its egg. But Aedes doesn't do that. Aedes likes to bite several people. So the net result is a complete family may be sick with the same disease in the house, or we may have clusters of cases in the locality done by this single mosquito, which is taking several blood meal. And this is really worrying because this was the Southern Hemisphere having the summer. They had a bad outbreak, and this trend is likely to continue for the rest of the world. And in Asia, the countries affected include Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, and Philippines, Malaysia, and Singapore. So basically, the dengue trend is continuing. Now, the factors affecting this increase is, of course, there is movement of people now, urbanization and associated problems with water and sanitation, continuous spread of the vectors into new regions, and in terms of climatic change, certainly increased precipitation, higher temperature, higher humidity, all favors the mosquito. And
to date, about 115 countries have reported chikungunya cases since the 1950s when it was discovered. So let me talk a little bit about chikungunya. The main symptoms are high fever, very severe joint pain, stiffness, and rash. And that's what most of the symptoms usually last up to 7 days. However, there is a proportion of people, around 40% of the people that are infected will have or report these symptoms up to 6 months or even years after the infection. And that's where the real burden of chikungunya is, because it can cause lifelong disabilities or disabilities per year, and then it affects the quality of life of the population.
We need to be on the alert to detect it early so that we can have less suffering and less secondary infections. So this is what we are aiming for. We really want to avoid any major outbreak.
And just move it
about half of the world's population is now at risk of dengue, with an estimated 100 to 400 million infections occurring each year. The disease is known for causing very severe illness upon reinfection, while only one vaccine is on the market and antivirals are still being developed. In other news, the IMF had said persistently high interest rates, a series of bank failures in the US and Europe, and deepening geopolitical divisions are threatening global financial stability. Growth is expected to remain about 3% for the next 5 years. Take a look.
Despite surprisingly resilient labor markets and strong consumer demand, despite the uplift in China, we expect the world economy to grow less than 3% this year. Central banks should continue to use interest rates to fight inflation, while using financial policies to ensure financial stability. This is the right course of action, so long as financial pressures remain limited. If that were to change, in other words, if financial pressures were to become more prominent, policymakers would face an even more complicated task with difficult trade-offs between their inflation and financial stability objectives, and more difficult balancing act of the use of their respectful tools. And this is why our message, and it would come loud and clear during the spring meetings, is going to be vigilant and be more agile than ever. We have done extensive research on the cost of fragmentation, and it is a very, very scary picture. Long-term costs of trade fragmentation could be as high as 7% of global GDP, roughly the equivalent of the combined output of Germany and Japan. If we add technological decoupling, then some countries would face losses up to 12% of GDP. And we just published a paper on fragmentation of capital flows, including foreign direct investments. They would be adding another hit on global growth. It's hard to put in one place the combined impact of all losses, but one thing we know for sure, they head in the wrong direction. Let me start with debt. About 15% of low-income countries are in debt distress, an additional 45% are near it. About a quarter of emerging market economies are at high risk, facing default-like borrowing costs. And this has raised a legitimate concern about the potential wave of debt restructuring cases and how to handle them at a time when current restructuring has proven to be difficult with costly delays.
Now, Georgieva's comments came in advance of next week's meeting of the IMF and its sister lending agency, the World Bank, where policymakers will convene to discuss the global economy's most pressing issues. In tonight's other news, Ruaning Yin won the star-studded LPGA's Dio Implant LA Open on Sunday. The 20-year-old played on her 5th LPGA tour and registered a one-stroke victory over Georgia Hall. Eva and Alan Basilyahe reports.
The LPGA season is in full swing, returning to California for the first time this year at the Dio Implant LA Open.
This last day of tournament play was delayed a few hours because of fog, but thankfully, beautiful SoCal sunshine showed up with an assist for today's winner. Leading the tournament at 14 under par was Ruaning Yin of China. Yin played purposefully through the first 9 holes until, with a deafening crack, she hit a tree on the 10th.
For my game, I have a goal that cannot make 3 putts, cannot make double bogey. And after I hit a tree, I thought, let's just make bogey here. Don't even think about make par.
The final showdown took place at the 18th hole, with England's Georgia Hall threatening to upset Yin's championship dreams. Sinking the ball here would have secured the win, but Yin's putt rimmed in and out. Hall was now poised to force a tiebreaker, but ultimately, her putt missed its mark. With a fist pump and triumphant yell, it was Yin who claimed victory at the DO Implant LA Open.
She played really well and, really good on her. I think she's like rookie or like second year out here. So I'm very pleased for her, and to hold that part in the last was great. Very tired, mentally drained, but really happy with the way I played over the, to give myself another chance of winning. But I just got to keep going and keep putting myself in contention. Hopefully the win will come. I'll see you next year.
The winner's cut of the $1.75 million prize purse is hefty at $262,500.
And in the world of sports, a purse like that is a lucrative accessory that pairs well with anything you got in the closet.
Evan Allen, Palos Verdes, California. Eagle News. We live in extraordinary times. California.
Thank you, Evan Allen. Now, a huge black hole is tearing through space, leaving behind a 200,000 light-year-long trail of newborn stars, according to space scientists. Take a look. The supermassive monster, likely born of a bizarre game of intergalactic billiards, is rampaging through the blackness and plowing into gas clouds in its path. The incredible forces at play mean this gas is being forged into a contrail of new stars, which have been captured on cam by NASA's powerful Hubble Space Telescope. Scientists believe it began its rampage after being ejected from a celestial ménage à trois. Peter Van Dokkum of Yale University says the runaway black hole, which has never been seen before, was discovered by accident. He said he was just scanning through the Hubble image and then noticed a little streak, very, very bright and very unusual. While this is the first tearaway black hole ever spotted, NASA says it might not be the only one. Their Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope, which is expected to launch sometime this decade, should give astronomers a much wider view of the universe and could lead to the discovery of more of these star-forming runaways. As always, I'll end the day on a thoughtful note. Our ability to look back and smile at our past is proof that God's plan is to keep us moving forward. This has been Eagle News International. I'm Alma Angela. Stay alert, stay informed, because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.